Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, you guys. We're going to get started here. My first thing is I'm going to ask you all to do something that I hate doing, which is introduce yourselves. And because of how Zoom works and everything, I think it's best if I call upon you and say, answer this question, introduce yourself. And I will start because, as I said, I hate doing this, but somebody's got to. I'm Nisi Shawl. I am the editor-in-chief of the Publishing Taught Me anthology. I've also edited a couple of fiction and nonfiction anthologies, including New Sons and New Sons 2, and Stories for Chip, which is for Chip being Samuel Delaney. I co-edited that with Bill Campbell. I co-edited Strange Matings, which was a nonfiction anthology about Octavia Butler. I co-edited that with Rebecca Holden, a real live Becky. Not really. And yeah, I also write fiction and teach, and I am so incredibly proud to be involved in this project. I'm going to call on people sort of in the order that I see them on my screen. We will have, hopefully, we'll get somebody here soon, James Beeman. But for now, let's start with Kanishk Tantia.
Awesome. That's not the order I see people on my screen, so I'm caught unawares. Hey everyone, I'm Kanishk. I am an immigrant from India. I came to the USA in about 2015, and I've been sort of writing and editing and doing a lot of fun publishing, creative writing work since then. But I really only started writing professionally a couple of years ago. As a writer, I primarily do fiction stories, mainly in the realm of speculative fiction, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of fantasy elements, but not hard sci-fi. You can find me on my website at kanishktantia.com or kanishkt.com. Um, yeah, how I came about my role is that I started writing and then I didn't stop, and I eventually said, hey, maybe someone else would like to read some stuff I've written. And then I got very lucky, and I suspect that a lot of our other questions will delve deeper into that. So I'll sort of end this little introduction and pass it back to you, Nisi.
All right, thank you. Oh, one more question. Can you give the title of your piece for the anthology?
Of course. The title of my piece is Culture Beyond Set Dressing. It's a piece about embracing your culture and trying to find the real meaning inside it rather than simply using elements of it to give a surface level overview of whatever culture or background you come from.
Thank you. Next, I will call on Nelly Geraldine García-Rosas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nelly. I'm also an immigrant in the US. I'm from Mexico, and I used to write in Spanish, but then I said, hey, why not? I can write in English. And I've been doing it for some years now. And I also read Slush for Clark's World. This is important for my essay in this anthology, uh, which is called The Ballad of the Slush Reader. And it's about the things that I personally have learned doing this for a couple of years now. Uh, how I ended up there, it was because Glasgow was going to do a call for submissions for stories written originally in Spanish. And since the original team of the magazine can't read in Spanish, they were looking for slot readers. And I decided to use this privilege I have over many people in Latin America, that is reading and understanding English, uh, to because I wanted them to have the same kind of opportunities I already have here in the US and in the English speaking markets. And I stayed there.
Thank you. Thank you. Cool. And then I will call on Emily Jiang.
Okay. I'm Emily. I am a writer, composer, and occasional co-translator. I self-identify as 1.5 lingual and not bilingual because my Mandarin and my knowledge of Chinese written and writing is not as strong as it should be, because I am the American-born daughter of Chinese American immigrants, raised primarily in Dallas, Texas. So I come from a different cultures, but I live now in the San Francisco Bay Area, hence the Golden Gate Bridge. And and so yeah, I science fiction fantasy is one, and horror is a genre that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a published children's picture book author as well. And more recently, as well as having some poetry published in magazines, but most recently, I'm also become officially an events coordinator, organizer for literary and writing events. Specifically, I last year became the co-assistant regional advisor for the San Francisco South region of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And now I am, a year later, I am now the co-regional advisor for the same region. And we're gonna have a lot of really cool events happening in the coming year, Zoom as well as in person. We just finished our big in-person conference and it was a lot of fun, but now I'm a little tired still from it. So I'm just gonna say that right now. Might not be as coherent as you would see me were I to be 100% rested. So, and my article for What Publishing Taught Me is the inexorable growth of BIPOC in publishing. And thanks to Nisi for helping me with the title, because I wasn't sure what I was going to call it. Yeah.
Oh, and it's, yeah, I am good with the titles and not so, I couldn't have written this whole thing, even with the help of my two assistant editors who are not with us because they are in totally different time zones than this one. We're all sort of West Coasty. So my next question, how has your understanding of the publishing industry evolved over time? And can you talk about any key moments that reshaped your understanding? And so let's go in the reverse of the way that we went just now and start again with Emily.
Okay. So for me, I was pre-published, and I like to say pre-published in books for several years before my picture book came out. And there is a difference between being pre-published and then published by a traditional publisher. The rounds of iterations, and so there was just so many revision rounds with my picture book. And it's like a little, I mean, the whole thing was only a few thousand words, but it was a really good experience for me to have, because at the end of it, when my publisher got bought out by Lee and Low, and then I transitioned again to a new editor, it set me up really well for getting the new editors comments as well as copy edits. And so that was what I was not quite so prepared for, was the amount of revisions that a published author would have to make. And in terms of the publishing industry evolving over time, I wanted to say that my article probably answers that question better than I could in a 1 or 2 sentence thing. But basically, I've seen there was a huge need for diversity back in 15 years ago. My picture book was published about 10 years ago, and the representation of not only the people being published but also the editorial staff was just really out of whack with what the readership was in terms of the readership was really growing in diversity, but the people creating books and publishing the books were not keeping up with that. However, 10 years later, it's a whole new world. I mean, we are way closer now than we were before, and a lot of that is covered in my article. But it just, which actually kind of coming back, I was like looking at how much things have changed, and it's very inspiring to me. I'm very excited about this direction that we're going in, and I know that some people can say that it's a little slow, and that is true, but progress is never truly a straight line. There's always 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, sometimes 5 steps back, but we are always going to go, I believe, in that direction. And we're going to get there eventually. Yeah. So
Yay. Yay.
yeah.
But actually it was like more, we were asking about how your understanding evolved. So can you add anything about that?
My understanding of publishing evolving before I was published, it was very mysterious to me, like the editorial system and, you know, all of that was incredibly mysterious. And I, as a pre-published writer, gave a lot of power over to like agents and editors that perhaps I should not have. When you get to know people who are agents and editors and publishing professionals, you realize we're all readers. We all like fundamentally love books. And there's this, for me, my understanding grew from kind of putting publishing professionals on pedestals to going, oh, we all at the heart have more in common than I thought we did. I think does that answer your question better, Nisi?
It does, and it's so coherent, let me tell you. Nelly, how has your understanding of the publishing industry evolved?
And coming from very small magazines in Mexico that usually don't pay anything, I did not know what to expect from the publishing industry, the English-speaking markets. I didn't know that it was that hard to get into some markets, for example, because there are a lot of people who want to publish, and unfortunately, we have very few spaces for stories because of money or resources, human, monetary, etc. So this understanding of the publishing industry has changed in the sense that I know that it's hard, but now that I'm in the other side of the magazine, not as a writer, but also as part of a team, as a slot reader, I know that it's harder than I thought. In the sense of numbers, I know that Neil Clark likes to publish the numbers that the Clarksworth gets every year, and there is a huge amount of people wanting to publish, and I just know that if I want to do it, I will just have to write the stories that I want. I also have to come to understand this, that I don't have to write for the markets. I have to write the stories that I want, because there's a lot of people. And I know that many others will be trying to find the key to what to write just to get published. But that's so sad. So writing what I love and trying just to find readers for it is just like the best thing that I have learned in this industry.
Yeah, because then at least you have the story that you love after, even if you don't sell it. Yeah.
Yes.
Good lesson. And Kanishk?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, Nelly, the first story I ever submitted was to Clarksworth because, like you, I come from a different country, and so I didn't have sort of a lot of context on the English publishing industry, and I liked the stories in Clarkswood, and I was like, I'll go there. How hard could that be? Still haven't cracked that nut. Maybe one day. How has my understanding of the publishing industry evolved over time? When I first started writing, I think I told a close friend of mine who is also an editor that I thought publishing was a game and I intended to try and win. So I sort of went into it a very tactical, very commercial mindset. Like, I want to get published, and that is sort of the be all and end all goal. I think today I would say that I was half right in the sense that I think publishing is a game and you can win. I just think that my definition of what winning is has probably changed. Very similar to the way that I think Nelly has had her personal journey. I hope those are the right pronouns, by the way. My own personal journey has been sort of around the same thing of like, oh, I was writing at first because I wanted to write stuff that I saw was getting published. So I was doing a little bit of like genre chasing, a little bit of trend chasing. And the problem with that is that it makes both the when you get published feel hollow, and it also means that, like you said, once you get rejected, if you get rejected, then you're left with a story that you don't particularly want to keep working on. So I've had that same thing where, like, I think my definition of winning now is sort of like, well, let me write what I want to write and then see if anyone wants that, instead of let me write what I think others might want me to write and see if that'll make me feel satisfied.
And then you can start your own trends too.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Well, then, yeah, that brings me to my next question of, we're all sort of like part of this movement that I've noticed of getting more and more diversity, racial diversity, and other kinds of diversity into publishing. As Emily's essay so brilliantly points out. So my question is, what role do your background and identity play in shaping the stories that you write or choose, when you're going through the slush, or want to promote through the events that you organize? What role does your identity, does your background play in that matter? And let's start with Nelly.
And for slush reading, I think that I want to champion stories that come from people from other countries and from people who don't speak English as their first language. I know that it's very hard. This is where my own self comes in. I know it's very hard to write in a different language, and also I know that sometimes the way that I use English could be considered like grammatically incorrect, and I know that there are people in the industry that say that, oh no, you have to write in perfect English if you want to use my amazing language. So I want to read stories that it doesn't matter if they have a couple of mistakes, again with code marks, because those are easily fixed or not fixed during the editorial process, right? So and I also want to read the stories that are different, that come from different literary traditions, and having a different literary tradition just allows me to enjoy what other people do. So yeah, that's what I love what I do.
And so that has a lot to do, a lot of influence on what you select, and also on what you write.
Yes. I mean, it's weird for me that sometimes I don't know how to translate in my mind some things that I want to say, and I just write a version of English that I think that can represent those ideas. So yes, in my writing, I think that it's also reflected.
How about you, Emily?
I have to confess, there was a time when I was trying to write away from what people projected I was. Like when I was like in college, especially, I didn't want to be considered a Chinese American writer. I wanted to be a writer. And I think many people from marginalized cultures also struggle with that, especially when there's not enough representation in out there being published. And then when I decided I wanted to write for younger audiences primarily, books for younger audiences primarily, and I saw the great need in that there was for representation, I just went full in and I just said, hey, I'm going to do things my way, like I'm going to write a Chinese American or Asian American story or featuring Asian characters story my way, and not worry about being critiqued if I'm Chinese enough or Asian enough, because that was a big fear of mine, honestly, because and I say this now just very matter-of-factly, but I look Chinese to many people, but I've only gone, I've literally lived in the United States the vast majority of my lifetime. I've spent maybe less than a total of 6 months of my lifetime outside the boundaries of the 48 United States. So this is something that, I just want to say I'm very, very aware of my American and US based bias as a result of that. And so, yeah, but I do feel like being raised as other, or being raised in an environment where I know and very aware that I'm other, has given me the capacity and the awareness to have empathy and try to be a strong ally for people, other kinds of populations who are also marginalized. And I think also, especially for children's writers, when you're writing for children, and there's just huge influence that you could have over young minds, just creating empathy for them, I think is such an important thing, I think. And yeah, it's kind of what I have to say about that.
Well, yeah, because I mean, your background includes Texas.
Yeah.
Which is also a point that Yoon Ha Lee makes in his essay, is like, this is part of who I am, and this is where I am writing from, and let us not forget that.
Yeah, that article just hit me right here, the whole thing. Yeah, absolutely. And that we are very, he's Korean American, that there is a distinct difference between people who are Korean American and Chinese American in Texas even, but yet there was a lot of overlap too. And yeah, the more we write our own truths, I think the better in our own experiences, the better. So.
And I'm asking you about this also, Kanishk, because you're from another background.
Yes. And in fact, like my whole essay is all about like the contradictions that I have to sort of go through in my mind about whether or not I'm a good representative of my culture. And I'm not hyphenated. I am Indian, and I still struggle with that. I think mainly because I understand the complexity of like the Indian culture, the Indian diaspora. Like, um, if you ask me what Indian culture is, I'm not even sure I could give you a single word answer or like a 1 hour answer even. What role does my background and identity play in my work? I mean, I think that very recently my take has been that I write what I write, and whatever comes out is like who I am, right? So I'm not consciously writing to be an Indian writer or to be a writer or to be the next great sort of like Tagore or Asimov or whoever. I'm writing because I write something that I want to write. Um, part of my essay in the anthology, Culture Beyond Set Dressing, is also about how I have learned that you can write a story and not necessarily have it be um, explicitly coded with your culture. It doesn't have to necessarily be, hey, the story is set in Mumbai, India, and here's an old lady in a sari, and like here's 500 other things that are like specifically Indian in nature. You can write a completely different story, and that story will still have like traces and artifacts of what your culture is. I've written stories, I think about like robots and mermaids and stuff, and I would still call those Indian stories, even if, you know, there's not even a single trace of like anything specifically Indian in them. They're still Indian stories because like the way in which I storytell, the narratives I choose to put forward, the character relations I choose to depict are things that I've seen in my life growing up. And so I think a big part of my background and identity come out in my stories, no matter what story I write. And like Emily, when I was a young author, I think I was doing myself a disservice trying to say, hey, let me try and imitate like um, I pick Asimov a lot. It's because he was one of the people that I read a lot growing up. But like, you know, Clark or Asimov or whoever else, that was a disservice I was doing to myself and to all the poor family members I made read my writing.
Well, I can attest to that because I'm reading, well, I'm teaching a Hugo House class, and I got to read one of the students' stories, got to read their writing for the first time. A woman named Gita Sharma.
Hmm.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Gita Sharma.
Sharma, yeah.
Yeah, and it's about this little girl who has this fascinating and intense and intimate relationship with all these inanimate objects, like shells and a chest and a doll that is dressed as a drummer.
Hmm.
And it takes place in India. It's not like full of like, you know, curry or something. It's not
Right.
like all Indianness, but the way that the story is told, the tension between the characters, the tension between my expectations of what the characters will be doing and what they actually do because of how she understands the world, those are very palpable. Those are real.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's an Indian story because she, an Indian, wrote it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it, right? Like that's the be all and end all of like how our identity plays a part in the stories we tell, is like it's inextricably who we are. So whatever we produce has to borrow from that.
I will just also add that I a few years ago, I think it was like 2015, I went to a conference called Black to the Future, which, you know, that's a very common name for science fiction conventions that feature Black people. And we came up with a manifesto. And one of the things, I'm going to get a little obscene here, is we will write whatever the fuck we want to write. And we won't worry about being Oreos or ice cream sandwiches, or, you know, I'm sure there's a ton of others, like, what have I heard? Bananas, coconuts, whatever, you know, whatever, like pretending to be ourselves, and then a core of whiteness, whatever, however we exemplify that in some food substance. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to do our work.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. I've got to mute for just a second. Someone's at my door.
Well, while Nisi is gone, what I wanted to add was also like I think a part of the contradictions that I have in my head is that if I try to write away from what people think that I am and towards like a very specific thing, I'm still being influenced by like other people's perspectives on what I should and should not be writing. And I don't know if Emily, Nelly, you guys feel that similar sort of push and pull, but like I certainly struggle with it even today. Like it's very hard for me to separate expectation from reality.
Right. Well, and it's hard because as fiction writers, especially, I find poets care less about being understood. But as fiction writers, we want our work to be understood, right? And so then we have to make sure that we put enough for our mainstream audience or a very niche audience, that it's there for them to grab and to like really catch and understand what we're throwing at them.
Mhm.
And I think finding that balance is really challenging, because sometimes, like you said, we could go more towards them, or maybe we should go more towards us in terms of how we revise our stories. One novel I really admire is Nala Hopkinson's Brown Girl in the Ring, because it's completely written in is Pidgin, or I don't really, it's completely written in dialect, a Caribbean dialect,
Midnight
right?
Robber.
Is it Midnight Robber? Excuse me.
Yes.
It's been a while since I've read her books, but like, yeah, one of them was completely written completely, and it broke my brain reading it, because at the same time, it broke my brain, but then it taught me a new rhythm, a new way to read, a new way to put together sentences. I found that experience to be quite amazing. And so I feel that, yeah, we are writers, but we are also in our way, we can be poets as well, with this is my work, and I don't need to explain everything to you. Like, you can figure it out, reader. You're smart enough to figure it out. You're smart enough to, like, retrain your brain, basically, and follow my way of thinking. So there is that push and pull that you need to consider, but I would like to try to lean into being a poet as much as possible. Thanks.
Nelly, do you have anything to add, or shall I just keep going?
Yeah, just a little bit. That this is a piece of advice that I got some years ago about how much of your culture do you put in your stories, so they're still legible for people who are not from your own culture. And this person told me, like, don't worry about that. Just think that your story is like your home, and you're doing a party, and you're inviting people. So you get to decide which rooms do they see. If you want to open the house, like, completely, you just put these kind of things from your culture. If you don't want to explain everything, they're in the living room. This is my home. You don't know how my bedroom looks like. But it's just like that. If you want to explain a lot, just do it. But if you don't, oh well, they will learn something new.
They can always look it up online. They can always ask a friend. Yeah, there's all that. Okay, so I will move on to another question now. The question is, what opportunities do you think are being overlooked by publishers when it comes to emerging voices of authors of color in speculative fiction? Are there opportunities that they are overlooking? Or are they all, do they know exactly, are they all savvy with that? And I'd like to start with Nelly.
I think that we still need to have more diverse people in everything. Just like in conventions, like you have your diversity panel, and all the BIPOC are there, but the other panels just have a lot of white guys, and it's like uh, people from diverse backgrounds have a lot of things to say about everything.
Yes.
So it's not just like, I mean, we have this space just to scream that, hey, we have we want to participate in all the other things. So all the opportunities, I mean, like, what are publishers not seeing? Like, everything. The, I mean, you want to have a panel about romance? Just have a lot of people of color in your panel. Like, they don't have to be pigeonholed in in the very specific thing about their diversity background, right? So I think that, yeah, we need more diverse people in everything.
everything, and I like your example of the conventions because those are a solid part of what publishing is. So thanks for that example. I see nods, I see smiles. Let's go with Emily now.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I'm comparing stuff to like 15 years ago. And so to me, we're already going in the right direction. I went to the Locust Awards and saw a panel on horror writers, and they were all BIPOC and other marginalized as well, populations as well, LGBTQ, members of the disabled. I mean, it was awesome. And I just feel like that's just kind of inevitably where we're going to go, unless some really clever people do stuff, which I hopefully they won't. But I just feel like there are more and more of us who are BIPOC, who are not only the readership, but also creating stuff and also editing stuff and publishing stuff. And it's just going to be part of who we are. In the United States, I know we're projected to be a majority minority, which means that no one race will be in the majority in roughly 20 years from now. That's what the US Census has reported, and that's not too far away. Like, I mean, 15 years went like that for me, another 20 years might go like that again. And so it's not too far away, and I'm really hopeful for the future. And again, when I think I remember what Yoon-Ha Lee said in his article about maybe not just making it about being BIPOC, but what are your other identities? Like, I'm also a member of LGBTQ. Are you also a member of the disabled, marginalized? What other marginalized communities are you also part of? And that can, cross transfer and be very synergistic as well. So
you think that publishers should look for more diversity everywhere, and more kinds of diversity
everywhere? Yes, absolutely. And I do believe that many editors, especially in science fiction fantasy, are actively looking for it. At least it's in their guide. Some might say it's just them saying the right thing, politically correct, but it's actively in a lot of people's guidelines, and what I did admire was when Christy and Arlie Sword were editing Fantasy Magazine when it was still open. They had, a lot of like submission windows open longer for specifically BIPOC writers, which I really thought was really great. And, just giving more opportunities for people who are traditionally marginalized is, I think, something that a lot of editors, if they don't figure it out by now, they will eventually figure it out, that it's their benefit. So, yeah.
And Kanishk, can you add anything? Bring it home.
Yeah, I mean, I think Emily has a very optimistic viewpoint. I'm not an optimist, and I never have been. So here's my cynical take: is I agree with Nelly. Like, more diversity everywhere is important and necessary, but like, I think we're gonna have to drag the publishing industry a little bit kicking and screaming across the finishing line here. Like, I think that if we just say, hey, things are going in the right direction, they'll stop going in the right direction. And I think we have a lot of historical examples of like diversity movements that tend to fizzle out or like tend to get a lot of backlash and then die out. So I'm one of those people who's like ever vigilant about things like diversity, and I'm always a little bit sort of like, we're going in the right direction, let's go faster, like, let's speed it up. 20 years is too late. Like, let's hurry it up. I want to see more BIPOC people on all panels. I want like BIPOC people to not be identified by the moniker BIPOC people. Like it's an important part of our identity and like should be celebrated, but I don't want to be like the Indian guy on a horror panel. I want to be a writer on a horror panel. That's my first thing. The second thing I'll say is I think we have a huge pipeline problem. if you're talking about emerging writers, you're not talking about people who already speak English and are in their late teens and early 20s who are already readers of these magazines and are writing to them saying, hey, I want to be published, here's a story. Submission windows are great. I love them and I have nothing against them, but they are catering to an entirely different audience than an emerging audience. My take is that publishers need to invest completely at a loss, I think, and there might have to be grants for this. They should invest in translating works back into original languages and circulating them. I want to see Clarksville get translated into Hindi and sent to India, knowing that like it will sell maybe 10 copies a year. I want to see magazines get translated into Spanish. I want to see magazines get translated into like Urdu or whatever other languages there are where we want to have greater representation. I came to the US not knowing any of these magazines, and I had to do a lot of research to figure out like where I could send stories in the first place. And I had a lot of privilege in being able to come here and be part of this market.
Yeah.
If we don't go where the writers are, we're never going to get new voices. We are only going to get people who are already in sort of this privileged category. I want a world where they look at me and say, you're not actually like meeting enough of our diversity criteria because like you are already so privileged and already have so many advantages. We are looking for like an entirely different demographic that we haven't even reached yet. So yeah, I think there's a huge pipeline problem. And I think that like, it kind of sucks though, because like publishing is like to some degree dying and to a much larger degree extremely unprofitable. And so every idea I have for how can we get more writers into the pipeline is, well, we have to spend money on it. What money? I don't know, man. Someone else is going to have to figure out where the cash comes from.
But I like your idea of grants. That actually does sort of answer the next question I was going to ask anyway. What systemic changes are necessary for the publishing industry to better support this movement? So yes, I agree. Grants would help. And the idea of translating the magazines and distributing them in other places would I think you're right. It would impress people. They would say, oh, well, I could go and be part of this because they would have the example of this before them. Any other ways we can spend money that we don't have? Can you think of anything else, Kanishk?
Other ways we can spend money we don't have. I think that we should. So a lot of like my thing comes back to language, right? Nelly, you were talking a little bit about how like you have this relationship with English where you don't care about grammar and stuff. I think language is naturally very fluid and should be broken and torn apart. Personally, so like my other idea is very similar, which is like, hey, we should offer to pay for translations for writers who believe that like they have a great story but can't write them in English. You know, like we should try and remove some of these barriers that exist simply because we all speak different languages. That alone will get you a lot of people. And I imagine there are plenty of translators willing to sort of pitch in because it is going to be a diversity effort with compensation. But I imagine plenty of people will be willing to like take the time to help out in these things. Those were sort of the couple of things that I had floating around in my head as like, hey, I would love to see these programs exist. But I mean, Emily, Nelly, I'm sure you guys have thoughts on actionable things that the industry can be doing too.
Well, if you don't, I do, but no.
Yeah, of course. You've been around so much longer than us. You probably have so many complaints about the industry.
Oh, no, I was just thinking, well, words, yes, but also illustrations. Illustrations really help like put forth, you know, a particular kind of identity so that, you know, honestly, I'm really glad that I'm not able to share this with you, but there was a comic strip that I was very familiar with as a child, Dennis the Menace. And actually, since my father's name is Dennis and I was named Denise for my father, they used to call me Denise the Menace. Then one day, the artist, Hank Ketchum, decided to add diversity. So he added a Black character that was like pitch black, except for wide white lips. It was just basically a caricature. So having illustrations that are based in background and experience with this particular culture, I think that would also help. And I think we could also throw money at that, yes?
Yes, yes. Something else I've been thinking about recently is the fact that I really appreciate the existence of anthologies that are designed to boost and center certain parts of diaspora. I'm part of an anthology right now, edited by Christy Park-Kulski, called Silk and Sinew, which is all about South Asian and Asian diaspora globally. And I think she's done a wonderful job of not just collecting stories that are very diverse and showing the breadth of like what is kind of an infinitely large diaspora, but also trying to do a lot of really good publicity for it, like having to knock on doors and say, hey, we've created this beautiful thing and we want people to look at it. More emphasis on like centering some of these works that are out there, would be really good. And not just in the sense of like, hey, this is a BIPOC thing or this is a diverse thing, but like this is a great thing and people should pay attention to it.
Thank you. Okay, so now we've covered everything, right? Nelly, Emily, you have nothing to say? No, you probably do. I'm kidding.
I definitely agree with the illustrator part. When I helped my publisher actually find the illustrator for my picture book, again published 10 years ago, and I went to the regional annual meeting for the children's book writers and illustrators, and they had a portfolio showcase of like 200 artists, and I took their cards and sifted through their portfolios, and there was so much amazing talent at that time, but I had very specific criteria. Like I wanted like the kids portrayed in my book to be mostly Asian, but also of other races, and especially some kids who could pass as biracial or multi.
Mhm.
And that, again, 10 years ago was a big deal. Or actually 12 years ago when I thought about that was a big deal. And I still have had people come to me about that book and say it's the first time my kid saw themselves in that book, because they couldn't, especially biracial people, there's so many different combinations and so many outcomes that could happen in terms of what you look like. But I thought that was incredibly important. And especially with some of the stuff that's been published in the past 10 years for children's, like graphic novels, written by BIPOC creators, the features of of the community, of either if it's all Black or all South Asian or whatnot, that the features are actually different and distinct from each other rather than cartoon imprint. That was one of my pet peeves, was like the cartoon imprint of basically a white face, but like colored in different shades.
Oh,
That was kind of what I grew up with, and that was not okay. And so I'm glad that there is more nuance given to the art illustrations for younger audiences now. And a lot of it's because they are being illustrated by people actually of those populations, so they understand the diversity, because no one people is a monolith, right? We're all real different in our own ways.
I
And
want a t-shirt that says that.
yeah. And the systemic changes I think are coming. I think it really, the leaders of the organizations really matter if they're truly being allies in truth instead of just, again, saying it to be politically correct. I'm kind of reminded of like Jon Stewart, for example, when he was heading the Daily Show full time, and so he got a critique that there were no women writers in his writing room, and he was like, well, of course we're diverse and support women. And then he actually looked around while he was ranting and noticing that, yeah, all of his writers in the writer room were white male. And when he figured that out, he actively made a lot of calls to try to get more women writers and BIPOC writers and more people on his show who didn't look like everyone else. And it took a struggle. But then when Trevor Noah, same thing, when Trevor Noah took over the Daily Show, and again, we're not talking about publishing, but I think the media is influenced by it's all kind of like representative and reflective of what all the struggles we're going through. Trevor Noah from South Africa took over the helm of The Daily Show from Jon Stewart, and then he realized when he was talking to his Black comedian friends, they're like, Trevor, let us know when you have a job opening. And he's like, but didn't you get the memo? Like, we're looking actively for diverse writers, and they're like, no, we didn't get the memo. So like, again, I think like what Kanishk said about the pipeline and or the communication method, how are we going to reach those diverse creators when there was another pipeline that was made for, non-diverse folks? But I do believe that is changing, like, again, with social media, the opportunities that you can find off, from the different groups that are forming in the social media space as well. And then also, going to conferences, I think, does help. But that also requires a socioeconomic strength that not everyone has.
Or, there's also Connor Bust.
There is Connor Bust. Nisi, do you want to explain Connor Bust to those who might not know Connor Bust?
Oh, I don't know. I saw Nelly do 2 thumbs up. Maybe you can explain, Nelly.
Nelly, do you want
Connor Bust was created to help fans and writers of color or with other marginalizations to attend conventions, rather by giving them the money for travel or other expenses, or by asking other people to make donations. And I used their help once, and they were to go to Finland. It was a Worldcon in 2017, I guess, and they were very helpful. I just asked them for a little bit of help, and they were like, but do you need more? And I was like, no, other people might need more than me, but they were amazing. And it's not like you have to have a huge CV of publications to have this help. As I said, they have very clear that it's not just for creators, it's also for fans.
Yeah, I'll add that I have a friend who went, and because of her situation, she had to have her sister and her son come with her, because otherwise, who would take care of them? Plane tickets, hotel, everything was all paid for by Connor Bust. And there was not this. She's not a writer. She's not an editor. She's a reader. She's a consumer, and she got to use Connor Bust. Nelly, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up at this point? Yes.
I think that I've been thinking about what we can do to have people of color or marginalized people in the editorial positions in the short fiction markets. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, if we need some kind of internships, like how do people learn how to be an editor?
By
Just like
editing?
by doing it?
But it's just like one can't just say that I'm gonna edit other people's work. If you don't have a plan to have a magazine or to be invited to edit an anthology or some issue of one magazine, like Apparition it's being defunct now, but they used to have this thing that they invited people to be co-editors for their different issues, and it was very interesting. So I don't know what we can do for that. Like I said, maybe internships, maybe I don't know, like having like a feeder team, like in soccer, that you have a group of people who want to be editors, for example, and just like there's this list of people who want to work in this. Maybe invite them to know to learn the reins of the work, just like for a couple of months. I don't know. For me it would be like very interesting, because I became a slush reader just like hey, I like to read, I can do this, right? But I think that there are a lot of processes in the at least in the short fiction publishing markets, that as writers we don't know. It's just like you send your story and it goes on the other side, rather published or rejected, and everything that happens inside that box is just like magical, and you don't know you don't know what it is. And so I think that opening those processes, like sharing how things are done, or inviting people to learn, could be very beneficial.
Yeah.
To have like a more healthy like industry, at least in the short fiction thing.
Yeah. Again, let's get some grants. Okay. I thought of another thing. A lot of times people's stories and novels are turned into audiobooks. Wouldn't it be great if there was like some sort of monetary support to get artists of color to do the reading? Because sometimes I have heard some people read some of my stuff before it was turned into an audiobook, and it was horrendous. It was really cringy. And I had to like say, maybe somebody else. But there are a limited number of people doing this. And there are also inroads being made on this career by artificial intelligence. So if we had some sort of backup, some sort of support for artists of color or other marginalized people to get in on doing that, then that would be helpful, I think. It would, okay. And I see in the chat, Kanishk, you have more to say, please.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the editing piece, because I think Nelly brings up a really good point. One other issue I'm noticing though is that so first of all, I think of course you become an editor by editing. I think there's also classes you can take if you want to learn sort of like the specifics of how you edit works and like some of the tools and things. So there are resources there. But I think one of the problems with publishing in general is that if you're trying to get into a position of any longevity or power, you kind of have to be financially set up for it, right? It's a poor return on investment in terms of time, editing is at least. Where at least as a writer, a lot of what you do is you write in your spare time and you sort of hope that like it takes off for you. I don't know most writers. Most writers I know have at least one other job, if not more than that. Editing, I feel like, is a more extreme version of that trade-off, even where like you do a lot of editing and the return on the time that you get is so minimal from a financial point of view that like it's kind of already gated towards people who are privileged and wealthy enough to be able to run like a magazine. When you said, how can we get people into positions of power and starting their own magazines, I was like, oh man, why would you wish that on anybody? Because ooh, starting a magazine is expensive. One of my friends started a magazine. She used to run the Dread Machine, and she showed me her finances, and man, it's rough out there. I feel like we all have $1 that we're circulating amongst each other. So like, yeah, I mean, like a lot of it, I think, comes down to, well, we need to have grants and we need to have money, and these internships would have to be paid so that people can afford to take some time off from their jobs, if their jobs even allow that, which many jobs do not. So yeah, the problem is kind of intractable in many directions because of the lack of like money flowing into the indie publishing industry, especially, I think.
There is a question from the audience at this point. I'll just read it from the chat so that we have it both ways. I think one of the main issues is at the top. I'm assuming at the top of the industry. So few of our fiction markets are actually owned by folks from marginalized communities. How do we help fund or create BIPOC owned and managed publications? Who wants to respond to that question? I mean, I could just sit here and talk all day, but
I
I'll
mean,
throw in. Sorry, Emily, please go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead. I have stuff, but go ahead.
I have a hot take, and I think my hot take is that we should just do funded limited run prints for some of these things, right? So part of the problem with capitalism is the idea that we've all imbibed to some degree, which is like infinite growth. Something has to exist in perpetuity for it to be successful.
right?
I think you flip that, you say, hey, we're going to have a limited run series that's going to last for a year. It's going to be 4 issues. It's going to be centered on certain things, and it's going to be funded for that time. You create exclusivity, you create a platform, you can do a very concerted and targeted marketing push for it, and you don't saddle somebody with the expectation of having to run and manage something forever. Like, it's not a child, it's a magazine. You get in, you please your audience, you get out, end of story. Right? That's what I would say is like, if we want to create this opportunity for people, we have to do it in a manner that is very, very intentional.
I will just hop in before you, Emily, and say that there actually is, as far as I know, one BIPOC owned and managed company, and that is Bill Campbell is the owner and publisher of Rosarium Press. So support Rosarium. Emily?
Yeah, and to add to that, like, Correo is a diaspora magazine, but a huge number of their staff and some of their co-founders are BIPOC. And also there is the Hugo Award-winning Faya,
Yes.
which is completely Black,
Mhm.
run, Black founded, everything. And I think that is kind of the beauty of science fiction and fantasy genre is that there is this like, well, if I want it to happen, I just make it happen. And a lot of people do just start their own zines, you know, and I like the idea of the concept of maybe it doesn't have to last forever. Maybe it lasts for a couple of years, you know. I remember when Uncanny started, they were on the Kickstarter, and I believe they still are on the Kickstarter
Yes.
trend.
Mhm.
And so there are thankfully a lot of ways that we can raise money now. It doesn't have to be just necessarily from a grant. And having worked in philanthropy and grant management, grants are sometimes a 1-year deal, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get more money next year for the
Yep.
same project. So yeah, I like this concept of like, well, we'll just do something for now and see what happens. And then, you know, it doesn't have to last in perpetuity. However, often what will happen is that you probably, if you ever want to do like win a Hugo or get recognized by the major awards, you do have to be around for a little while. So if that is part of your goal, then maybe consider a more sustainable model. But if your goal is just to publish really cool stories, then yeah, why not? It could be like an anthology, even an online anthology, as much as like the one we're a part of, right? So, so yeah, I like that idea a lot.
I mean, I guess I would ask, like, why isn't that the goal of the Hugos? Like, why do you have to be around and know people? That seems, I
What do you
mean,
mean? Why do you
not,
have to be around enough to win awards or to
yeah,
get?
like I think that's part of the problem is like you shouldn't have to be around for a while and know people. You should be able to write and publish cool stories, and that should be recognized and awarded and given a platform. Especially considering that, again, emerging writers by definition haven't been around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. You know, in theory. However, the reality is when you notice who gets on the awards, you know, it takes a while for them to get there, you know.
Mhm.
Usually that's just
You have to
been
keep
history.
poking people.
Yeah, that's some history. Again, not to say that it might not happen in the future, but history, that's been the pattern. And so I'm basing my comments on what I've seen. Now, again, maybe things will change and it could be amazing. But there's also that core readership that are, a little slower to change sometimes too in our genre. And they're adjusting, they're adjusting. So I feel overall there's actually a lot of opportunity. And again, like I said, about 10 or 15 years ago, when I looked at and when I was actively submitting to magazines, science fiction fantasy magazines, the vast majority of the staff didn't have a single person that I could easily see as BIPOC on their staff. But now, like almost every single major magazine has at least one, if not more. At least one. And is it tokenism? Who knows? And again, they're junior, but if you start your own magazine, you could be the head, right? So yeah, I'm seeing definitely progress. And part of it is why I'm more hopeful is because I hadn't been publishing for a few years. So I wasn't in it this whole time. I'm like seeing it from like a gap, and saying, wow, there's a lot of changes. This is really cool. And maybe if you see it every day and you're living it every day, maybe you're not seeing the changes. But as someone who's just returning after a multi-year hiatus, I'm like, wow, this is exciting. So I just wanted to give my perspective on that. Yeah.
Should we hear something from you, Nelly, on this point, or should I go back to the questions that I had already
Let's go
developed,
back to the questions.
that I had actually already stolen from Somto, the intern, one of the two interns that I've been working with. So the next question would be, what advice would you give to writers of color seeking to break into the publishing world? Are there resources, strategies, or mentors that were helpful to you? What advice would you give, Nelly?
Find your community. I think that having a supporting community has been amazing for me. I had the opportunity to attend Clarion West in 2019, and my cohort had people from all over the world and all over the US. And that was like kind of the first time that I felt that I was not alone in many of my struggles of publishing or trying to find my way in this industry. So I think that community is very important, and also to know to realize that diversity is not a monolith, that even if we have some marginalizations, we have to understand that there are people who are different from us. And for this, I would like to recommend Writing the Other. Nisi is involved in that because like even BIPOC people need to learn how to write other people's, how to understand that cultural backgrounds are very different. So yeah, in that sense of where can I learn that, not specifically a mentor, but a space that acts like one.
Well, thank you for the shout out. Kanishk.
Sure. So I was reading Bird by Bird for like maybe the second time now by Anne Lamott, and she has this thing about how writers are people who observe a lot, and then they put that observation down on paper. So I guess my advice really is just boils down to, if you are a writer of color and you are part of a marginalized community, especially in a country like the USA, your observations are unique. Your observations are very different from the observations of people around you. We say diversity is not a monolith. A very practical example of that is that your observations are going to be unique from every other person you know, even if they come from like the same background and the same culture as you. Your observations are what form the bulk of like your storytelling at the end of the day. And so I think my advice is just like write down the things you see. Write down something you said that pissed someone off. Write down something you said that like made people laugh at you. You know, like write down all of those like little moments you had where like you felt like an outsider, where you felt like you did something wrong or you did something right. If you made a funny joke that a lot of people laughed at, and then later you felt like I shouldn't have said that, because like you get that little feeling of guilt afterwards as to like, oh, were they laughing with me or at me? All of those little things are things you write down and you write stories about. So that's what I would say is like observe a lot, talk a lot, meet a lot of new people, find your community for sure. I found a community and that was helpful. And at the end of the day, just write. Like when I first started writing, I asked someone like, hey, what advice do you have for me? And they were like, just fucking write, man. So, you know, that's what I would say is just write. Just like sit down with some pen and paper or a typewriter, or like, I don't know, if you want to write with a quill, write with a quill, but like write some words on paper and see what it looks like.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Emily, advice?
So I have 4 points there, all themes and variations of what have been said before, but if you don't mind, I'm just going to go through them quickly, which is keep improving your craft. Find a critique group or 3 or 4, as many as you can handle, and attend workshops and just keep practicing your craft, because the more you write, the better you'll get. And the beautiful thing about writing is that you will never age out of it. You will always get better with age. You're like wine, you know. There's some other occupations not so much. Like if you wanted to be an Olympic athlete, no, you're done at a certain age, right? But with writing, it'll just get better and better. Number 2 is keep in contact with community, where it's virtual or in person, and I highly recommend in person, and go for Con or Bust if that is an option for you. The people that you meet are what helped me want to come back to publishing. I was like, I have friends here that I want to like reconnect with and talk to, and then they also help you realize that your challenges are not unique, that a lot of writers go through a lot of the same challenges. Then 3, keep your well of resilience full. There's a neuroscience called Andrew Huberman who says that everyone needs to experience rejection. It's healthy to experience some rejection, he says. And when asked how much rejection one should get, he said, oh, about 10 to 15% rejection. And I laughed because that's the polar opposite of what most published writers, or like, you know, especially if you're beginning, like you're just getting rejected all the time. So we need a well of resiliency to rely on, to draw upon when we're getting rejected constantly and things are not going the way that we believe they should go. And finally, for that, keep in mind your why, for why you're writing. You know, in turbulent times, in times of adversity, the why will keep you centered. The why will keep you on the right path, and you just cling to that, because there is a reason why you're doing this, and just it's yours alone. No one else can take that from you. So
Sweet. I do have one more question. I did want to check though and see, are there any other audience questions at this point? Because we've got, what, about 14 more minutes? Okay, just heard from our tech support that there are no questions from the audience. So I can go to my last question, but also I really just want to say, what do you guys want to talk about that I have been quashing with my moderation? I should step back from moderating here for a moment.
well,
Go ahead.
You're an excellent moderator. Your questions are thoughtful and you give space to let us go where we want to go. As I often kind of sometimes went on a tangent here or there, I appreciate your moderation skills so very much. So thank you. Yeah, I didn't feel quashed at all, but maybe my other panelists can speak up about their interests.
I think you've done a great job moderating. Sorry, Nelly, please go ahead. I feel like you're
Oh,
right on
no,
the
no,
cusp
no,
of
no,
saying
go
something.
ahead.
I did have a question that I wanted to ask all 3 of you. I think maybe Nelly might have more of a perspective on this, but One of my questions was around the idea of developing a publishing industry in other countries entirely from scratch, right? We spoke a little bit earlier about like, hey, how do we bring the American indie publishing industry and like distribute that? How do we develop publishing industries in a brand new country? And so Nelly, I think you said that you were from Mexico, so I was hoping you might have something specifically about Mexico that you were thinking about in that vein.
There are a lot of nuances in that, because Mexico has a kind of healthy program of scholarships and grants for creators, not just writers, like also for architecture and cinema and a lot of things that it's done every year. And it sounds amazing. Like you get a stipend each month for a year that covers more or less what you would have with for a job. It's like don't worry about working, just work on your craft.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there is this kind of mafia things that there are a lot of people who knows people who get some of those grants or help.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard in that sense. But I also have seen people starting their magazines with no other thing in mind that publishing. That not thinking about money, and I know that it's hard, that we're used to be paid for writing, and you go there and there are a lot of magazines, but they don't pay you a cent. It's just like I can publish your story and that's all. I will promote it on social media, but there is no economic compensation for that. So you have like these two worlds. Like there are a lot of young people who want to create magazines and markets and spaces to publish other young people who are writing, and this is in the speculative community. And then you have like the magazines that are paid with government grants that strangely just publish like the same people all over and over. So I think it's kind of hard trying to balance that. But yes, like I mean, like people want to do great stuff. They're very creative, and I've seen folks who said like we're not writing the things that Americans want us to write. Like we're not writing these kind of stereotypes. We're doing our own version of fantasy or science fiction or horror. So in that sense, I think that yeah, if people want to do stuff, they will do it. It will be hard, but it's happening.
I know that there's a Nigerian speculative fiction magazine that was started in the last few years. Omenana and Chinelo Onwualu was one of the founders and an editor. So I know that at least in that country, it seems to have been going for a few years now. So I would count that as viable. Yeah. I don't know of any other examples, so I'm sorry.
I mean, in Spain, they have a very healthy science fiction community. They used to have a magazine called Supersonic, and they paid like money similar to the English-speaking markets, and they also translated some works that were originally in English for that magazine. It's not being published anymore, but they still have a lot of translation markets, like Cuentos para Algernon, uh, that look that look at people who are writing in English to translate them into Spanish. They also have their awards that are similar to the Hugos. But I think that since their community have been working for years, for decades now, it's just like we can see how fruitful it's been for them.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's in Japan, there's the Sense of Gender Award that is similar in scope to the Otherwise Award, formerly the Tiptree Award. And I understand that in China there is a huge and thriving science fiction publishing industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think China's industry is almost completely homegrown and it's like huge.
It's not homegrown though.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's supported absolutely by the government. And I say this because I was on 5 or 6 panels at the first World Con that a lot of those people, a lot of the writers and scholars and leading science fiction people from China attended. So I was actually on the panels listening. I was put on the panels because of my last name. I'm fully aware of this. And I kind of like sat there and listened and also translated for the mostly American audience, English-speaking American audience that was there if I felt like there was a need for translation, of cultural translation. But yeah, no, the science in China, the government, I believe in the 80s or whatnot, the government, decades ago, the government decided they wanted China to be a world power, and they looked at all the other more developed countries or the ones that are in power, like the United States, and realized science was a big part of their power. And then how do we, as develop scientists? Well, get them, a lot of them read science fiction. So then they encouraged a whole generation of science fiction reading, population. And of course, there's over 1 billion of them now. A significant, as even a small percentage of them would be a huge readership. And so that we have generations who grew up reading science fiction and fantasy in China, some of it produced by Chinese writers, but some of them also translated from, English or other, primarily English. Yeah. So it was huge. And I know that the World Con was hugely sponsored by the government in China as well. So they have a vested interest in science fiction and promote the promotion of science fiction.
So we just have a few more minutes left. Do you have summations, wise words to say, and leave everybody with? Let's go around again. I don't have anything, by the way. I'm like totally not wise and not imparting anything. And so again, we'll go around and start with Kanishk.
Oh, sure. Wise words to say to people. I think I said earlier, publishing is a game, but you get to define what winning means. But probably much wiser than that is like, just write, man.
Thank you. Nelly?
I just want to thank you, Nisi, for the opportunity to bring us together to talk about publishing in general. And I think that anthologies like Publishing Without Me will be very helpful, just like to understand the here and now of our industry, and that hopefully in a couple of years, things will be very different for the better.
Thank you. Emily?
I want to echo that. Thank you, Nisi, for this amazing opportunity, and also your fabulous interns, Somto and Zhui, Ning, and please forgive me if I completely mispronounce your names. But I just wanted to say working with you guys has been wonderful. And I do have to end a quote that kind of prompted me to return to publishing, because so when Nisi was guest of honor at a convention about 2 years ago now, they had this amazing presentation, and their quote stuck with me, which is, you need to tell your own, and I'm paraphrasing. So is that okay?
Sure,
But-
sure.
Or do you want to offer the quote? Okay, verbatim. So I'm paraphrasing, but for me it was, you need to tell your own story, because if you don't, someone else will do it and they'll probably get it wrong. And that I just went like, I need to start writing again. So that was a really inspirational moment for me, and I thank you for that too, even though I paraphrased it.
No, I think that was pretty much true to what I was trying to say. Yeah, thank you. So thank you to the panelists and to our editorial interns in absentia, Somto, Ihezue, and Zhui, Ning, Chang. And yes, if you want to know more about this kind of stuff that we've been talking about, if you want to see learning to edit by editing in action, visit the SFWA site and look at all of the wonderful essays by these authors and by others. Publishing Taught Me is the name of the anthology, and it's a play on Publishing Paid Me, which was a hashtag that sort of opened up the conversation about who is getting the right kind of money and who is being supported by publishing as far as BIPOC and non-BIPOC, or people of color and people of pallor, as I like to say. So yes, please come and visit that site, and thank you so much for making this a real fun and informative time.
Thank you so much, Nisi, for having all of us. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
And thanks to our audience for watching.